There's a definite moment when a wound stops being just a wound and transforms into armor, a precise instant when pain ceases to be temporary and instead crystallizes into a permanent part of your structure. Most people never realize when this happens, and by the time they do, it's often too late. The armor is already fused to their skin, impossible to remove without tearing away pieces of themselves. Carl Jung understood this better than almost any psychologist of his time. He saw that the defenses we construct in childhood to survive don't simply disappear when the threat passes. They solidify, they harden, they fuse with our identity until we can no longer distinguish between who we really are and who we felt we needed to pretend to be in order to survive. If you've ever tried to open up emotionally and felt an internal wall blocking you, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If you've ever wanted to cry but discovered you simply can't, you're familiar with this armor. If you've noticed that your emotional reactions seem automatic, as if someone else is at the controls, you're wearing a suit of armor you don't even remember putting on. Over the next few minutes, I'm going to show you exactly how wounds become armor, the precise process of narcissistic consolidation, and more importantly, why some people manage to heal their wounds, while others remain trapped forever inside a fortress of their own making. The difference between those who heal and those who harden isn't willpower. It isn't intelligence. It's not even access to therapy. It's timing. There's a window, and when that window closes, the wound becomes armor. But before we talk about the window, I need to show you how the armor forms. Because if you don't understand the process, you won't be able to identify what stage you're in, and identifying the stage is the first step to knowing whether there's still time to take off the armor or if it's already become a part of you. Every child is born vulnerable, completely open, without defenses. This isn't weakness, it's the natural state of a human being before they've been wounded. A young child cries when they're sad, laughs when they're happy, expresses anger when they're frustrated. There's no filter, there's no mask, there's no armor. The armor begins to form with the first wound that isn't healed. When a child is hurt emotionally and no one comes to help, they have to do something with that pain. They can't simply leave the wound open. It's too dangerous, so they cover it up with whatever's available. It might be pretending it didn't hurt. It might be disconnecting from the emotion. It might be creating a story about why they deserved it. Anything that makes the pain feel bearable. This initial covering is what Jung called an adaptive defense. It's intelligent. It's necessary. It's what allows the child to continue functioning in an environment that isn't caring for them. The problem is that the defense wasn't meant to be permanent. It was a temporary bandage, an emergency solution. But if the wound keeps being reopened, if new wounds appear in the same place, the bandage has to stay, and stay, and stay. And over time, the bandage becomes skin. Jake was 5 years old when he learned that crying was dangerous. His dad hit him harder when he cried, so Jake stopped crying. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was survival. His body learned on its own that tears meant more pain. By age 10, Jake could no longer cry, even when he wanted to. The defense had become automatic. What was once an emergency choice became an involuntary reflex. By age 20, Jake was known as the cold guy, the one who never gets rattled, the unshakable one. People admired his fortitude. They didn't know it wasn't fortitude. It was armor. And beneath the armor, there was a 5-year-old boy who was never allowed to cry. At 35, Jake was in a dead marriage. He couldn't connect emotionally with his wife. He couldn't say, "I love you," without it sounding fake. He couldn't have a real fight because fighting requires feeling anger. And he didn't feel anything anymore. His wife left him. She said it was like living with a statue. Beautiful on the outside, empty on the inside. Jake didn't cry, not because he didn't want to, but because he couldn't. The armor wouldn't let him. This is narcissistic consolidation, the moment when a temporary defense becomes a permanent personality structure. Jake didn't choose to become emotionally armored. The armor installed itself as a survival mechanism and then refused to leave. Hold on, because Jake's case illustrates only one type of armor. There are several, and each one forms differently. Jung identified that there are at least 4 main types of emotional armor, 4 different ways that wounded children find to protect themselves, and each of these ways can crystallize into a different type of narcissism. First armor, coldness. This is Jake's case. The child who was punished for expressing emotion learns to shut down the emotional system. In the beginning, they only shut down the dangerous emotions, sadness, fear, vulnerability. But the emotional system doesn't work that way. You can't selectively shut down emotions. When you shut down the negative ones, the positive ones also weaken. The person with coldness armor appears functional. They work, produce, maintain superficial relationships. But inside, there's a void, a permanent disconnection from their own inner world. They no longer know what they feel, and sometimes they don't feel anything at all. This type of armor produces what we call a cerebral narcissist, someone who lives in their head, not in their heart, who analyzes emotions instead of feeling them, who confuses thinking about love with actually loving. Second armor, grandiosity. When a child is constantly diminished, humiliated, made to feel small and insignificant, they have 2 options. They can accept that they're small and insignificant, or they can build an inflated version of themselves to compensate. Most choose the second option, not consciously, automatically. The ego inflates to compensate for the wound of insignificance. If I'm special, then it doesn't matter what they say. If I'm better than others, their opinion doesn't affect me. The grandiosity armor is the most visible. It's the classic narcissist, arrogant, superior, constantly needing admiration. What most people don't see is that beneath the grandiosity, there's a child who feels completely worthless. The inflation is proportional to the wound. The greater the grandiosity, the greater the insignificance it's trying to compensate for. Third armor, invisibility. Some children discover that the best defense is not to be seen. If I disappear, they can't hurt me. If I don't exist, they can't reject me, so they become experts at not taking up space, at not having an opinion, at not bothering anyone. This armor produces the covert narcissist, the one who doesn't seem narcissistic because they don't exhibit grandiosity, but the narcissistic wound is there, equally deep. Only, instead of inflating the ego to compensate, this person deflates, becomes small, invisible, but internally deeply resents the world for not having seen them. The covert narcissist is the most difficult to identify. Seems humble, seems altruistic, seems self-sacrificing. But underneath, there's a dull rage against a world that never gave them the attention they secretly believe they deserve. Fourth piece of armor, the performance. Some children learn that the only way to receive love is to perform, to be the best student, the perfect child, the one who never causes problems. Love doesn't come freely. It comes as payment for performance. This armor produces the performative narcissist, the person who only exists when they're being successful, who panics when they fail, because failure means losing love, who doesn't know who they are outside of achievements because they were never allowed to simply be. On the outside, it looks like healthy ambition. On the inside, it's desperation, a never-ending race to prove worth that was never given freely. Have you recognized any of these armors? Maybe more than one. It's common. Most people develop combinations. A little coldness here, a little performance there. The armor adapts to the specific wound it needs to cover. But here's the crucial point that most don't understand. The armor itself isn't the problem. The problem is when it consolidates. Remember when I said there's a window? Here's what that means. In the first few years after the armor forms, it's still flexible. It's still possible to question it. There's still someone underneath who knows that the armor isn't them. The child still remembers, even if vaguely, who they were before they needed to protect themselves. This window lasts, on average, from 5 to 10 years after the formation of the primary defense. During this period, if the person has access to a safe environment, to relationships that don't require armor, to experiences that contradict the original need for protection, the armor can soften. It can even be removed with care. But if during this window the armor continues to be necessary, if the environment remains hostile, if the relationships continue to demand defense, something different happens. The armor fuses with the identity. The person stops knowing where they end and where the armor begins. The defense stops being something they use and starts being something they are. Asking this person to remove the armor is the same as asking them to remove an arm. It doesn't make sense. It's not possible. The armor has become them. This is what Carl Jung called identification with the persona. The mask that was meant to protect becomes the face. The role that was meant to be played becomes the identity. There's no longer a difference between the actor and the character. And from this point on, healing becomes exponentially more difficult, not impossible, but much, much more difficult. Ashley discovered her armor at 38. She had been in therapy for 2 years when the therapist asked a simple question: "What do you feel right now?" Ashley froze. She didn't know how to answer. She could say what she thought, what she believed, what she should feel, but what she really felt, she had no access. The therapist explained about armors, about how Ashley had built a fortress around her heart to survive a narcissistic mother who punished any emotional expression. Ashley listened, understood intellectually, but when the therapist suggested they work to remove the armor, Ashley felt panic. Not a logical panic, a visceral panic, as if someone had suggested she throw herself off a building, because for Ashley, removing the armor was that psychological suicide. The armor was her. Without the armor, who would be left? This is complete consolidation. The person can no longer imagine existing without the defense. The idea of vulnerability isn't just scary, it's incomprehensible. It's like asking a fish to imagine breathing outside of water. It doesn't compute. Ashley continued in therapy. But the work changed. Instead of trying to remove the armor, the therapist started creating small cracks. Tiny moments of controlled vulnerability, seconds in which Ashley allowed herself to feel before the armor closed again. The process took years, not months, years. Because undoing a consolidation isn't like healing a wound. It's like rebuilding an entire identity. But hold on, because I know what you're thinking. Has my window passed? Has my armor already consolidated? Is there still time? I'll give you 3 signs that indicate whether your armor is still flexible or if it has already fused with you. First sign: you can imagine being different. If the idea of opening up emotionally scares you, but you can imagine doing it, your armor hasn't completely consolidated. The fear is normal. It's even expected. It means the armor is doing its job, protecting you from what once hurt you. But if you can imagine it, even with terror, that means there's still separation between you and the armor. You know it's defense, not identity. This knowledge, however painful, is a good sign. Now, if the idea of vulnerability doesn't scare you, it confuses you. If you genuinely don't understand what it means to open up emotionally, if it seems like a foreign language you've never learned, this indicates more advanced consolidation. Second sign, you feel discomfort when the armor operates. Ashley, at the beginning of therapy, didn't feel anything wrong when she couldn't answer what she felt. It was normal for her. It had always been that way. She didn't know there was another way to be. But after a few months of work, she started to feel discomfort, a vague feeling that something was missing, that there should be more. This discomfort was the armor beginning to be questioned. If you feel something is wrong when you disconnect, when you perform, when you hide, that's a good sign. It means there's a part of you that knows the armor isn't you, that remembers another way to exist. If you don't feel any discomfort, if the armor operates in perfect silence, the consolidation is more advanced. Third sign, you can feel longing for who you were. This is perhaps the most important sign. If you can, even rarely, feel longing for a version of yourself that existed before the armor. A child who laughed without fear, who cried without shame, who loved without calculating. If you can feel that longing, it means the connection with the true self hasn't been completely severed. It still exists somewhere. Buried, yes. Protected by the armor, yes. But alive. If you can't feel any longing, because you can't remember ever being different, the consolidation is more advanced. Now, I need to be honest with you. Even if all three signs indicate advanced consolidation, it doesn't mean there's no hope. It just means the work will be longer and more difficult. Ashley had advanced consolidation. She couldn't imagine vulnerability, didn't feel discomfort, had no longing. And even so, after 4 years of intensive therapy, she started to create cracks in the armor. The first moment of rupture happened unexpectedly. Ashley was watching a movie, a scene with a mother and daughter. Nothing special, but something broke for 2 seconds before the armor closed again. Ashley felt. It was overwhelming, not because the emotion was huge, but because she hadn't felt anything for so long that any emotion was overwhelming. Ashley cried for the first time in decades, not a big cry, just a few tears, but enough for her to know that there was still someone underneath the armor. Going back to the pattern I'm showing you, Jake, Ashley, and now I'll tell you about Mark. Mark was the opposite of Jake and Ashley. While they had armors of coldness and invisibility, Mark had an armor of grandiosity. The classic narcissist that everyone recognizes, arrogant, superior, constantly needing to be the best, the smartest, the most successful. But Mark's story started the same way, a wounded child who needed to create a defense to survive. Mark was the second son. The older brother was the favorite, the genius, the pride of the family. Mark was the rest. What was left over? What wasn't good enough? At 7 years old, Mark decided he was going to prove them wrong. He was going to be better than his brother, better at everything. And he was. Studied harder, trained harder, pushed himself harder, until he surpassed his brother in all the metrics that the family valued. But here's the paradox that no one told Mark. Even being objectively better than his brother, he never felt enough, because the original wound wasn't about capability. It was about worth, And worth that needs to be proven isn't true worth, it's performance. Mark's armor of grandiosity consolidated in adolescence. At 15 years old, he could no longer distinguish between who he was and who he needed to appear to be. The grandiose persona had swallowed the wounded boy completely. At 40 years old, Mark had everything: money, power, respect, and a void so large that no achievement could fill it. Because achievements feed the armor, not the true self underneath it. The collapse came when Mark failed for the first time at something important. A business deal that went wrong, and the armor, which worked perfectly while he was winning, simply didn't have the resources to deal with defeat. Mark went into depression, not the common depression. The depression of the narcissist who lost the source of validation, an existential void that no previous success could console. It was in this collapse that Mark, for the first time, saw the armor, understood that he had spent his entire life proving worth that was never questioned by the true self. That the race for grandiosity was an escape from a wound of insignificance that he had never healed. Mark's process was different from Ashley's. While Ashley needed to learn to feel, Mark needed to learn to fail, to allow the grandiosity to deflate without entering total collapse. To discover that there was someone underneath the performance, it took 3 years. 3 years of therapy, of controlled failures, of learning to tolerate the insignificance that the armor had been built to hide. Today, Mark is still successful, but he doesn't need to be anymore. The difference is subtle on the outside, but huge on the inside. He does it because he wants to, not because the armor demands it. He can fail without collapsing. He can be ordinary without feeling like he's going to die. Did you notice what Jake, Ashley, and Mark have in common? They were all normal children before the armor. They all built intelligent defenses to survive, and they all paid the price of consolidation. Entire lives lived by personas instead of people. But there's something even more important that I need to tell you. The armor doesn't just affect you. It contaminates all the relationships that you have. Jake couldn't connect with his wife because the armor of coldness blocked any true intimacy. Ashley couldn't create deep bonds because the armor of invisibility kept her always partially hidden. Mark couldn't truly love because the armor of grandiosity transformed every relationship into a competition. And the most tragic thing, if these people have children, the armor will be transmitted, not genetically, psychically. The cold father teaches coldness. The invisible mother teaches invisibility. The grandiose father teaches that worth needs to be proven. The cycle continues, generation after generation, armors creating new armors. Carl Jung called this the generational transmission of complexes. The unhealed wound of the parents becomes the wound of the children. The armor of the parents becomes the model for the armor of the children, and so a single wound in childhood can echo for entire generations. According to Carl Jung, breaking this cycle requires awareness. It requires seeing the armor. It requires choosing, one interaction at a time, not to let it control how you relate to the people you love. You've just received a complete map of narcissistic consolidation, the 4 types of armor, the 3 signs of consolidation, the healing paths of real people who managed to create cracks in fortresses that seemed impenetrable, and the truth about how armors are transmitted between generations. This type of content requires deep research in Jungian psychology, requires translation of complex concepts into accessible language, requires a commitment to bring transformative truth instead of shallow entertainment. If this video helped you understand your own armor, if it gave you hope that cracks are possible even in advanced consolidations, consider clicking on the golden heart down there. The super thanks isn't just financial support, it's you saying this truth about emotional armors needs to be known. When you click on that heart, you help ensure that more people trapped in their own fortresses discover that there is a way out. Now let me give you something practical. 4 steps to start creating cracks in your armor, regardless of the type you have. First step, name the armor. Seems simple, but it's powerful. When you feel the armor operating, when you realize you're disconnecting, inflating, hiding, or performing, say internally, "This is the armor. It's not me, it's the armor." That simple act of naming creates distance. It starts to separate you from the defense. Remember, narcissistic consolidation happens when the armor fuses with your identity. Naming it is the first step to undoing that fusion. Second step, find a safe moment. You're not going to create cracks in the armor in situations of stress or threat. The armor exists to protect you in those situations. Trying to remove it when you need it is counterproductive. Find a moment when you feel safe, alone or with someone you absolutely trust. And in that moment, experiment with lowering your guard for a few seconds. Feel what happens in your body. Observe without judgment. If it's overwhelming, go back to the armor. That's okay. The goal isn't to remove the armor all at once. It's to create small fissures, brief moments of vulnerability that accumulate over time. Third step, expect resistance. When you start to create cracks, the armor will react. It will send danger signals. It will create anxiety, fear, even anger. This is normal. The armor was built to protect you. It doesn't know that the original threat has passed. Don't fight the resistance. Observe it. Say, "I understand that you're trying to protect me, but I'm safe now. I can experiment with lowering my guard for a few seconds." Fourth step, be patient. Ashley took 4 years. Michael took 3. Jake took 5. Undoing narcissistic consolidation isn't a project of weeks. It's the work of years. And that's not to discourage you. It's to calibrate expectations. Each crack you create is a victory. Each moment of vulnerability, however brief, is progress. The armor took years to form. It will take time to soften, and there's something no one tells you about this process. It's not linear. You'll have days when the armor seems thinner, more permeable, and you'll have days when it seems thicker than ever. This is normal. The nervous system doesn't unlearn survival defenses in a straight line. Ashley had relapses, whole months where the armor returned with full force. Michael had moments when the grandiosity inflated again, as if all the work had been erased. Jake had nights when the coldness returned, and he felt like he was at square one. But they weren't, because each time the armor returned, they recognized it faster, named it faster, chose differently faster. Progress isn't in the absence of relapses, it's in the speed of recovery. If you start this work and have a relapse, don't give up. It doesn't mean it didn't work. It means your nervous system is testing whether it still needs that defense. Your only task is to show it repeatedly that it doesn't. Carl Jung said something that sums it all up. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The armor is darkness, not in the sense of evil, in the sense of unconscious, of automatic, of unseen. When you see the armor, when you name it, when you understand how it formed and why it exists, you begin the process of making it conscious, and consciousness is the first step to choice, and choice is the first step to freedom. You didn't ask to build this armor. You were a child. You were surviving. You did what you needed to do with the resources you had. There's no guilt in that, but now you're an adult. Now you have resources you didn't have before. Now you can look at the armor and decide, do I still need this? Does it still serve me? Or is it holding me back more than protecting me? The answer doesn't have to be dramatic. You don't have to tear off the armor all at once. You can just create one crack, then another, until one day you realize that you still have the armor, but it doesn't have you anymore. Comment below which of the 4 armors you recognized most. Coldness, grandiosity, invisibility, or performance. And if you feel comfortable, tell us what stage you think you're in. Flexible armor or already consolidated. This reflection will help you know exactly where to focus your work.